All right, I think we're ready to go. Well, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is that you are watching this. Welcome to our NASSM 2021 virtual presentation titled That's Classic, the Impact of the Nostalgic Media on Sport Consumers. On behalf of Dr. Eric Hungenberg of the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, my name is Mark Slavich at Greenview University in Des Moines, Iowa. And we do thank you for taking the time to check out our presentation. We know there's many things you can do in the summer. And so we appreciate your time. So with that said, let's go back. So heck, even looking at this photo just makes me just uneasy. So March 11th, 2020, we all know the story. We all know what happened that night with Rudy Gobert coming out that he tested positive for COVID-19. And we know the rest of the story all the way up to present day. The shutdown of the sport industry and all the negative impacts that it's had on our lives, our industries, sport included. And a big part of that is with the shutdown of sport, the impact on media, which is going to be the focus of the study as we'll get into. So when you think about everything from television, you turn on ESPN, you turn on Fox Sports Network, there's no live events. You turn on your local sports talk radio on the way home from work, there's nothing live to talk about. You go online, you get the picture. So as a result, these media were forced to turn to other programming to fill up their television slots, their radio, something to talk about, something to put on the website. And as a result, you saw on ESPN, you saw the ESPN The Ocho, going back to the dodgeball movie. You saw some of those crazy things. You saw esports, and then you saw a couple other things. You saw some classic games, and you saw classic documentaries. One, many of you probably are familiar with because, heck, we all watched it, The Last Dance. Went back last year, the docuseries on the 1990s Chicago Bulls, really their prime era during the 90s, which over the 5 weeks that it aired, it averaged 5.6 million viewers, which just to compare it to something more recent so far this year, Major League Baseball, as a ESPN Sunday Night Baseball, is averaging about 1.5 million viewers. So it got a lot of viewers. And really this got us thinking for the purpose of the study. Well, let me take a step back and say this, that this type of programming really did two things. It provided the opportunity for older fans. So if you're somebody, which is probably you, and you grew up maybe in the 80s, maybe 70s, and you remember watching the 90s Chicago Bulls, it took you back to that time period. Whereas maybe if you're younger, maybe some of your kids who, of course, weren't alive during that time, it allowed them to really get educated on Michael Jordan, on this prime era, which we all talk about. And so some of you may think about you were watching it with your families, and so you were experiencing it, re-experiencing it, and then you were explaining it to your kids, which was a really cool experience. So that really set the stage for the purpose for our study. We wanted to look at the impact of nostalgia in media during this time of the onset of COVID-19, and where we had no live sports for a few months in 2020. And specifically, it was a period of discontinuity. We're going to get a little bit into discontinuity, the hypothesis here in a few minutes, not a whole lot just for the sake of time, but essentially we had a major disruption in our lives, which taught us to seek comfort. What brings comfort? Nostalgia brings comfort, going back to the past. And so it was a perfect time to see, okay, was this, during this time, did this nostalgic media produce positive social, psychological, and behavioral responses, which we'll further get into. So before getting on, just a little bit of a review. First of all, nostalgia. Nostalgia is a social psychological process. It is you have a stimulus that produces a thought and an emotion. An example is you walk in to the kitchen, you smell of cinnamon rolls. It brings you back to your grandma when she used to make you cinnamon rolls when you were growing up. So you have the stimulus, you have the thought, you have the emotional response. We see it everywhere because it has positive marketing implications, attitudes toward brands, purchase intentions, so on and so forth, as well as social psychological impact when it comes to self-esteem, social connectedness, and meaning in life, and other positive social outcomes. So it is everywhere for good reason, because it is powerful. Within sport, it's been looked at in a couple of sectors. Eric and I have looked at it with Dr. Brendan Dwyer, as well as a few other people in a couple of studies, and have shown the impact of the environmental stimuli at a ballpark and the positive impact it has on emotional and behavioral responses. Also, Fairley in 2003, as well as a number of others, have looked at it through the context of sport tourism and shown the positive impact of nostalgia to where it can actually serve as a motive for sport consumption. Now, then looking at media, and this is where within nostalgic media, you see the television show Mad Men, which was a show that aired within the last decade or so, and was during a time, it really depicts a time period during the 1960s, I believe. And so it takes people back to a previous time. Then you also see other shows. I know one that comes to mind that's been looked at in literature is Dawson's Creek. There's so many other ones where they have these nostalgic themes, whether it be aesthetics, whether it be just the lives and themes of the characters. Nostalgia is all present throughout media. And then when it comes to sports, you think about baseball, especially. You think about The Natural, you think about Field of Dreams. You see all these movies and it takes you back to these previous times. So with that said, it brought us to our research questions. I'll read them off here. So first of all, to what extent do personal, collective, and historical nostalgia impact individuals' social well-being? Second, to what extent does social well-being impact individuals' pleasure and behavioral intentions? Then are there differences in the rate of personal, collective, and historical nostalgia based upon type of media consumed? And then to what extent does the amount of time lapse influence individuals' rate of personal, collective, and historical nostalgia? Now, before going on, let me stop right there because I realized that I didn't explain personal, collective, and historical nostalgia. So personal is anything that happens to you personally. So it's just an event that is nostalgic for you and only you. Collective is a group of people. You think about a fan base, your favorite team, an event that was a big game, big moment in your favorite school or favorite team's past, that every time you see it, it brings back positive thoughts, positive emotions for everybody that's a part of that group. And historical is nostalgia that of an event that was before your life. So going back to the example of your kids maybe watching The Last Dance, they weren't alive for it, but they have seen Michael Jordan, they have seen the 90s Bulls in media, and that has really educated them a bit. So anytime that they see it, they experience nostalgia because of the fact that it is present in media, even though they weren't alive for it. So these three types, important to know. Personal has been shown to be the most impactful because it is something that occurs to you specifically. And so, so that's where we wanted to really cipher out, okay, which of these three has the most positive impact on social well-being. And so we'll explain, or Eric will explain a little bit more about the measures and get into the method and results.
Yeah, so thanks, Mark. I get the pleasure of enlightening you on the interesting aspects of our methods. So first, we used an online platform called mTurk for data collection purposes due to its ability to elicit responses from consumers throughout the United States. So different regions were captured throughout the United States. And to be eligible for participation in the study, participants would have to have consumed sports media through television, radio, internet, social media, etc., within the last 48 hours. That was to ensure adequate or accurate recall. And if they had, then subsequent questions determined first whether their favorite team was involved, the type of content they consumed. So whether it was a replay of the game, a replay of highlights, whether it was a documentary, discussion of analyses of a game story, etc. And third, the platform that was used to consume the content. Again, TV, radio, internet, podcast, magazine, social media. So following this, participants were then assessed on their level of personal, collective, and historical nostalgia that was evoked from consumption of the content. Respondents then also assessed their level of social well-being from Hepper's state functions of nostalgia scale. Now, the scale was reduced to only relevant items that were aggregated to encapsulate a social well-being outcome. Nostalgia proneness was also measured for purposes of controlling for one's history of nostalgic reverie. Certainly studies have revealed that certain individuals more than others have preference for experiencing nostalgia more than others. And so we wanted to control for that. And finally, to capture time lapsed, participants were asked their age at the time of the original content featured in the recently consumed content. So for example, individuals who consumed a replay of a game played in 2005, but were born in 1990 would have a time lapse period of 15 years. So data were collected over a 2-week period, and this provided us with an adequate sample size of 263 complete and usable surveys. And Mark, if you will go to the next slide, you can see from the table that the majority of the participants were male and Caucasian. Nearly 70% of participants were 40 years old or younger. Most participants maintained an annual household income of less than $100,000, and most were single, having never been married. Finally, most participants were college graduates, with just under 50% having a bachelor's degree and 22% a master's degree. Mark, you can go to the next slide. Before running SEM, we wanted to ensure that the measures we were using were reliable and valid. And so we did perform CFA, which produced adequate fit indices. We had average variance extracted values that fell within the appropriate range. Reliability tests all exceeded Cronbach's alpha values of 0.70 or higher. So there was no reason to be concerned with the internal structure of the measurements that we were employing. And so this then segued into structural equation modeling, which I will address first. Mark, if you'll go to the next slide. You can see our model. And as can be seen in the figure, there are 3 numbers. The first identifies the whole model. The second and third numbers identify whether or not the favorite team was involved or not. So that the second number in that box is capturing a favorite team being involved. The third number is capturing a second, or the favorite team was not involved. So this allowed for a multi-group SEM analysis. As you can see by the figure, we controlled also for age and nostalgia proneness. And after doing so, historical nostalgia and collective nostalgia each exhibited a positive relationship with the respondent's social well-being, accounting for 49% of variance explained. Personal nostalgia, however, was not found to be a significant antecedent of social well-being. However, the results certainly suggest that sport media content void of live competition can produce favorable effects in viewers. But I should point out that a non-significant chi-square test from the multi-group analysis indicated that these findings were consistent regardless of whether or not a viewer's favorite team was participating or not. And not only did feelings of social connectivity and self-regard improve the pleasurable effects a viewer felt, it also significantly impacted their future behavioral intention. So ultimately, the effects identified in the model support sport media's ability to deliver content that engenders positive hedonics and increases consumer intentions that for certain are meaningful for organizations. Mark, if you go to the next slide. So also of interest was the effect that time lapsed would have on respondents' level of nostalgia and their social well-being. So again, to recall, time lapse reflected the amount of time between the year the content being recalled took place and the respondent's current age. Process macro regression was used to assess the sequential relationships in this model, but it was also used to test whether nostalgia mediates the effect of time lapsed has on social well-being. Not surprisingly, the regression results revealed a significant model accounting for 48% of the explained variance in social well-being. Results indicated that time-lapsed predicted personal, historical, and collective nostalgia, but similar to the SCM results we just shared with you, only collective nostalgia and historical nostalgia were predictive of social well-being. Full mediation was identified through an examination of the bootstrap confidence intervals, indicating that time lapse may indirectly influence viewers' social well-being through its effect on collective and historical nostalgia. So lastly, Mark, if you'll go to the next one. Right, and I apologize if the data is a little bit difficult to see in the slide, but our last analysis aimed at exploring how different media content may influence respondents' nostalgia. The Manova examination indicated that there were significant differences in the types of content's effect on viewers' personal, collective, and historical nostalgia. Post hoc tests indicated that personal nostalgia and historical nostalgia are significantly greater when viewing documentaries, as well as replays of highlights in comparison to viewing discussion or analysis of a game and or sports story. So what does all of this mean? To get into some basic theoretical implications, purely from a methodological perspective, the validity of examining personal, collective, and historical nostalgia as three distinctive outcomes was supported. Not only did the SCM model demonstrate discriminant characteristics, it also revealed predictive qualities that illuminated disparate forms of nostalgic responses. Now, this is important because while Baker and Kennedy introduced the notion of collective nostalgia nearly 25 years ago and advocated that it be categorized separately from personal and historical nostalgia, the sport domain has rarely chosen to parcel it out as a multi-dimensional reaction in quantitative research design, let alone include collective nostalgia at all in its frameworks. So this occurs despite it being very prevalent in sport. Without question, sport induces nostalgia through recollection of one's own life. So that would be personal nostalgia, right? Through culturally experienced events that encapsulates collective nostalgia, and in moments that vicariously celebrate the past, historical nostalgia. So in this study's case, media content produced varying effects in the degree to which respondents experienced each of these three nostalgic types. So Mark, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. And then when you think about, and thank you, Eric, for that, I'll jump off and come back to some of the things that Eric mentioned. From a marketing perspective, I mean, you think of just what we can take away when it comes to this nostalgic media. And of course, we have to keep in mind, this was during a time of discontinuity. This is a time where we had no sports to watch. And so that, we'll get into the limitations, but that is a unique element to consider when it comes to the results of the study. But it really did allow us, while you could call it a limitation, it's also a prime opportunity to really see the impact of nostalgic media during that time, where we needed something to bring us that comfort, that escape. So when it comes to this media, practically, yeah, it shows that this stuff works. So if you are ESPN, if you're Fox, you're thinking about airing classic World Series games, or you're some sports website, and you're thinking about, we've all seen the list, but this stuff really does work. And so that is a very practical outcome, and something that media need to continue to look at moving forward, even with the with of course sports being back in 2021. Now I'll come back to one other thing, but I do want to get into limitations. I mentioned one of them, and Eric mentioned the fact that we did use a little bit of a unique measurement, one that had not been used in a sport context in with collective, as Eric mentioned, with Baker and Kennedy introducing it. It hadn't been used, and this is a limitation, but also an area for future research as well. Nostalgia within sport in general is a topic that isn't all that well researched. We got into some of the previous research within facilities as well as tourism. Within media, it's something that isn't well researched, and so definitely an area for future research. But when it comes to the collective, the three types, personal, collective, and historical, we really do need to look more at this, because it really can tell us a lot. Eric mentioned the theoretical implications of that. But I think there's so many more. I think it can really blend theoretical and practical if we can know what type of nostalgia really is being induced by a certain type of sport content, as well as just the time period. The Bulls during the 90s was perfect because of the fact that so many of us were alive and remember it really well, while our kids were not, as we got to tell them about that. I know, just anecdotally, I was talking to Eric a couple of days ago about, remember watching the Roger Clemens 20 strikeout game early on when sports were shut down. I remember that's a memory I still have to this day. It's been over a year. And other games I watched, other things that I still remember viewing, because it really did bring about a positive social psychological response. So when it comes to limitations, when it comes to future research, there's I'll mention just to finish off on limitations. Yeah, unique context with the instrument, but really it's such a great opportunity for us to look further into this. And so there's a lot to look at with future research, and we're excited about it. And yeah, I'll just stop at that. There's many ways to go with this, and we really do believe that sport media can gain a lot from this information, from looking at the types of nostalgia, from looking at we mentioned the time lapse. How much of a difference does that make if somebody viewed a game 30 years ago versus 5 years ago versus 1 year ago? So there's a ton of future implications here, and a ton of future research. So with that said, we will open it up to questions. I know, Eric, you do have one question. I'll let you, I guess, thank you, but Eric, I'll let you ask the one question that you had. I believe you did.
I'd like to say you're not catching me off guard here, partner.
Oh, okay.
But, I like the spontaneity. Boy, through COVID, Mark, what was your most enjoyable sport media experience?
That is a really, really good question. So favorite sport media experience during COVID? Yeah, I'd actually would say a couple, and it's interesting. So being a native New Orleanian, as well as an alumnus of LSU, watching the Saints Falcons game back in 2006 to return to the Dome is one I remember well. And then I'd say probably one of the 26 times I watched the LSU Clemson national championship game.
How many was that?
I think 26 was the total count on that. So thank you to ESPN and SEC Network for airing that game as much as you did. It was well warranted, especially considering the season that LSU had following. Anyway,
final question then. Would 27 have been excessive?
Maybe that's an area for future research.
Okay. All right.
Well, on behalf of myself and Eric Hungenberg, we would once again like to thank you for taking the time to view our presentation. And please do reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions, and we'd be happy to answer them. And we wish you a very, very happy summer on the golf course.
Have a good day, everyone.